Howdy, folks. I want to welcome you to the campfire, a place where we can just sit and tell a story or two, and we can ponder on the unusual and mysterious things that occur out here in the wild. I'll tell you some of my stories, and well, you can tell me some of yours. This is Clay Steele. Come join me around the campfire here beneath the stars. Grab a cup of coffee or a cold drink, and let's talk about our stories. Can't wait. Howdy, folks. This is Clay Steele. And I'm just sitting here around the campfire, and kind of been a good long day, and I'm just unwinding. Got me a cup of coffee here and watching the flames, and man, it sure is relaxing, isn't it? So I talked to y'all last time about somebody else bringing in some stories of their own, and we talk about it, and that's what this is all about. Campfire stories everybody shares when they get to sit around and get relaxed. Well, this friend of mine told me this story, and now he's been around for a while. It's been an outdoorsman his whole life. He was born into a ranching group and been a hiker and a backpacker his whole life. And now this is a story he told me not too long ago. It was about him as a younger man and an adventure he had that stuck with him for his whole life. And he wanted me to put this story out there and share it with y'all and just kind of let you know that you're not alone. If something like this has happened to you, well, just know that it happens to a lot of people. Maybe you pass them on the road and you don't even know it. Maybe they've had one of the same experiences y'all have had. So let me tell you this story. It's pretty good. Well, he was, like I say, he was a young man. He was in his 20s at the time. And he was going to head off he had a little short amount of time for vacation in the summer there, and he was going to head off on a backpack trip. It's nothing for a young feller then to go 25 miles or so. But as it turns out, if you know anything about the outdoors, and I'm sure you do, is it's really not very wild. You know, a lot of us desire the aloneness, the wildness that gets the farther you get away from people or from civilization. You know, the farther you get back into the trail system or even off the trail system, you know, the more enjoyable it is for a lot of people. Less sign of individuals. So his plan was to get to about 25 miles off the trailhead, and he was headed out to Crystal Lake. And his plan was to take the main trail, the designated trail, for a short ways out of the trailhead, and then he was going to go cross country, which is a little bit brave, and usually that means you're climbing over hill and dale to get there. It's not the most direct, and it usually means it's not the easiest route. And the whole idea was he'd see less people and less sign of past people. That's what he was really after. Well, it was a two-day pretty good hike or backpack trip for a young guy. He figured it was going to be something like 11 miles a day. It was going to be 11 miles halfway, and then 11 miles a second day, and that's about what he figured. And he was going to try to make it to Big Pine Pass the first night, or just beyond, depending on how trail went for him. So he got an early start after he parked the car, and off he went. And he didn't stop and linger much. He was pretty much, 11 miles is a pretty good trip for a day, in the mountains. Everything went pretty good the first day. He was moving pretty good and really setting them down. He wanted to get to camp, and he really, wanted to get to Crystal Lake. That was the destination for the second night, and that's where he was going to spend several days, and the fishing was going to be fantastic. So the trip, even though it's beautiful and it's a physical challenge, it still wasn't what it was all about for him. So where he stayed wouldn't really matter, but that was his goal. So the first night, he did make it just about dark. He made it to Big Pine Pass, but he didn't, instead of going across the pass and starting down the far side, which was more exposed, he stayed just before the top of the pass, off to the side of of the meadow there was this big, thick grove of trees. Dark, of course, because it's almost dark. There's no moon, and it's pretty hard to see anything. But he can see that he wants to get in those trees to get shelter, and it looks fairly level right there on that little shoulder off the side of the meadow. So off he goes, gets up in there, and it's kind of musty smelling grove of thick, dark trees with kind of spongy bottom, spongy ground. We've all been there. So he went ahead and he set up camp, and he made supper with a real small fire. Of course, he's tired. He's been, he drove for a while early in the morning, and then he got out and walked 11 miles. So he's ready to go to sleep. He doesn't waste a lot of time. He gets in his sleeping bag, and by dark, by 9 o'clock, he's asleep. And things are going well. We got a little bit of sleep. Now, about 12:30, as things go, 12:30 that night, he woke wide awake. That feeling where your eyes fly open. And it was about 12:30. It's not that he heard anything. It's not that he saw anything. It was just exactly the opposite. It's just that everything was dead quiet. You didn't hear anything. No insects, no nothing. And so he laid there without moving and, almost not breathing, just being quiet and listening, trying to figure out what it was. Why'd he wake up? Had he heard something or what? It's that kind of quiet outside that is like screaming loud in your head. It just doesn't sound normal. It's so quiet. Well, it wasn't for a little bit. He identified there was some noise out there, and it was for a little farther up in the trees towards the pass just a little bit. And he heard, it wasn't like a lot of noise. It wasn't like a lot of walking and slamming around. He had to listen pretty careful, but because it was so quiet, he could hear it. And it sounded like he identified it as an animal. And it was, you could hear it breathing, sort of a raspy breathing and sighing sounds. And it wasn't really moving around much. It was just kind of there. It was a ways away, but he could hear it. Well, he laid awake for about an hour just trying to figure it out. Was it a threat? What was it? Was it a bear? Was it what's out there? I didn't hear it much after that. It was pretty quiet, and he did fall asleep by about 2:30 or 3 o'clock in the morning. He was pretty fitful there for most of the night. Kind of shook him up. Well, he woke up early. He was up by 4:30 in the morning, and it was still dark, of course, and he was in a hurry to get the heck out of there for a couple reasons, of course. One, he wanted to get to Crystal Lake and get to fishing and see if any of his friends showed up, but mostly he just wanted to get the heck out of those trees. It just wasn't right. He was still a little unsettled by the whole thing. So he broke camp pretty fast, packed everything up, didn't bother to start a fire or cook any coffee or anything. He just made sure everything was safe and knocked it all out, packed it all up, and stuck it in his backpack, and grabbed some trail mix, to eat on the way out of there, and beat feet, started up the hill and was headed for the pass. And it was still just that pre-dawn, barely light showing on the horizon kind of thing. So it was basically dark because there hadn't been a moon the night before. And that was about 5 o'clock. So he's making double time for Crystal Lake. He's just thinking, well, the day's going to get better, and that eerie feeling in that little grove of trees is going to leave me here in just a mile or so. But as he's passing through the pass, he's going up and he's through this pass, and the pass is basically just a low, brushy, low spot on this mountain ridge, and he's crossing through it, and there's trees, big dark trees on either side as they start up the hills on both sides away from him, and about 100 yards away on either side. He's just kind of going through the middle of it. There's no real trail. There's a game trail, but it's not an established trail on the system, so it's not a real big improved trail. So he's just making the best time he can. He's picking them up and putting them down and getting across the top of there, and he's kind of looking around a little bit, and he kind of looks back towards his campsite, and it's, he's already 400 yards from the campsite or better. He's up on the pass and moving. And I mean, it just about, the hair on the back of his neck stood up when he saw this. It's just, there's this immense, dark, hairy figure. There's no other way to describe it, he said, that was that obvious. At the edge of the trees, just a few hundred yards above where my campsite was, in the trees. This is on the edge of the meadow and the edge of the trees above it, the edge of the pass. And it was just standing motionless. Of course, he's moving. He didn't stop to look at it. He's looking over his shoulder at it, and he's just moving anyway. And he says it's just standing there motionless. Shoulders are sort of hunched forward, if you could describe that. He's just watching me walk away with these, these big eyes watching me, walking as fast as I can without breaking into a run. I know that trick, don't run when you're being watched or chased or, threatened by an animal. And he says, I just was pretty sure this was kind of an animal, and I didn't know, what else. My mind is still processing as I'm moving. So I made it across the pass, and I kept glancing back, and he hadn't moved. This big, hairy, man-looking creature hadn't moved the whole time, just was watching me pass. And by then, we're probably 250, 300 yards away from each other. And as I started to go down the far side of the pass, I got one last look at him, and there he was, still in the same spot. Hadn't looked like he moved at all. And he was still watching me, just motionless with the shoulders hunched forward look. He said it wasn't a threatening thing. It was just very strange. He said there was no doubt what I saw. So as the miles burned out from under him, he made another 11 miles that day. And as the miles burned out from under his feet, he was feeling better and better and better about things, getting lighter hearted, and had a lot of time to ponder what he'd seen. It hadn't made no sense to him at the time. He said he still doesn't really understand it. Why, such a massive creature and physically superior in many ways from the looks of it, at least size-wise, that if he wanted to pursue him and hurt him, it seems like, it would have been easy to do, especially because he'd actually passed him before he saw him. Could have come up behind him and closed that 150 yards or 100 yards to much less than that. Anyway, the point is this happened early in his life. And since then, he's made many amazing things happen in the world, and he's a successful businessman. And this is just one of the memorable things that's happened to him in his life. And believe it or not, I'll have to talk to you about this later, he's had more than one encounter with the Bigfoot type creature. He calls this one Bigfoot. He said there was no doubt that this was, the archetypical Bigfoot description. And he calls this one, the Bigfoot thing. But he has traveled quite a lot and been in Europe and parts of Asia, and he's seen some things. And I can't wait to tell you some of those stories. But I guess the thought here is like that's kind of the way life works. Like you start out on this trip and you think you're just going to go fishing. You don't think of things as a threat, or you don't think anything's going to stop you when you're young, especially because your body's so physically strong. And then something like that happens, something really strange that would stop a lot of people in their tracks, and they wouldn't be able to carry on beyond that. He just moved on with it. And that's really the lesson, is it's the way life works, is the bigger the highs in life, the larger the lows. And so it's really how you deal with things like that. The trick is to just accept it and deal with it and move on. And it sort of balances itself out. Oh, I wanted to tell you that story. And I wanted to hear some more of yours. So if you do have anything you want to talk about, send them on in to us. We'll just sit around this here fire again. I do a lot of sitting around fires. I love it. And we'll talk about this. All right. Well, I'll see you again. For now, this is Clay, and I'll talk to y'all later.